How did you first get involved in telecommunications?
Well, I have an interesting story with regards to how I got into telecommunications. I actually was being trained when I was in high school, and my electronics teacher came and got me out of the gym, broke up my basketball game, and had me go in and talk to these telephone people who were looking to recruit high schoolers into their program with the phone company. And that company happened to be Mountain Bell. So I took the test, passed the test, and from that point forward, I became a part of the Bell system. I enjoyed working for Mountain Bell. I started as an apparatus cleaner, then a frameman, then a switchman. I did a stint of being a test board technician until I graduated from college. And then I got a job as a programmer analyst for Mountain Bell. At the breakup of the Bell system, I was sent to AT&T, and my job was to write programs to help them do pricing and billing for what they called LEC service, or local exchange company services. And I spent approximately 20 years of my 42-year career doing that type of work. I was eventually recruited and hired and moved into the fraud and security organization. And I was a supervisor. They saw in me the programming skills that I had already, and they felt that I would be an asset for helping to catch hackers. So fast forward another 15 years that I spent in the network security organization as a supervisor, as a manager. My career with AT&T led me into CFCA. The boss I had at the moment, at that time, was a former CFCA president, and her name was Willing Duncan, and I'll never forget it. She kept telling me, Clemmie, you need to go to CFCA. So, I was always impressed with the knowledge that she had of fraud, security, how breaches occurred. So I went to this first CFCA conference. I enjoyed it. I gained a vast amount of knowledge from the knowledge network and the presentations that were given. And from that point forward, I was hooked on CFCA. Now, my career with AT&T, as I continued to advance, I moved into a government solutions position with AT&T, where I was a client business manager for the U.S. Department of Justice. They thought that was a great fit for me since I had done, as a CFCA representative, training sessions for the FBI at Quantico and training sessions for the U.S. Secret Service down in Glencoe, Georgia, FLETC, so that they could understand how to write a subpoena to get the telecommunications records that they needed. Now, in their initial attempts to get or subpoena records from the phone companies, they didn't know how to write a subpoena, and they'd end up with several 100,000 call records that they had no idea how to sort out and sort through. So we thought it would be helpful from CFCA's perspective and to go down there and teach them how to make subpoenas, to teach them PBX technology and some of the things that we do in terms of evaluating and looking at call records to prevent fraud or to detect it. So they were quite grateful with that, and a lot of relationships I developed with the federal government at that time. So I was a natural fit and candidate when AT&T Government Solutions was looking for someone that could be a client business executive for the Department of Justice. Before I retired from AT&T with 42 years service, I was actually moved again, a bit of a promotion to the Executive Office of the President, and a lot of initiatives that the federal government was trying to deploy and implement. I was fortunate enough to give some input and guidance to them as they were looking to establish their own policies and to take measures to safeguard the networks of the federal government. So after a 42-year career, I retired from AT&T. I know I don't look old enough to be retired, but I am. And that's my story from the start.
Collaboration and education has always been key staples of the CFCA ethos. How do you think these factors have contributed to CFCA's success?
Well, here's an analogy used in the telecom industry that I believe is still relevant today. And it's been said that fraud within the industry never goes away. It behaves like water in a water balloon. You squeeze one end and the water simply moves to another position in the balloon. Similarly, with fraud, if you apply fraud controls in one area of service, it simply moves to another area of service that's less protected. So CFCA provides its members with knowledge and awareness of fraud trends and tactics used by fraudsters, as well as best practices to prevent losses. Awareness and detection are keys to protecting services providers and their customers from significant loss. Another analogy I like to use is this. The ocean is full of predators, both large and small. It's the fish that's unaware or unable to detect the presence of a predator gets eaten, regardless of its size. In a matter of minutes, a fraudster can gain access to steal significant sums of revenue if they're undetected. So the CFCA has been the premier fraud prevention association in communications over the industry for years, which has sustained our success over the years.
You are renowned in CFCA for your contribution and dedication in your period on the CFCA board. What drove you personally to continually give so much to CFCA and the industry?
Well, in 1986, I personally became a victim of social engineering fraud that was perpetrated against my then 11-year-old son. He answered a phone call made by a scammer posing to be a telephone repairman who told him that our phone line would be disconnected immediately unless he gave the scammer a calling card number. So in a state of panic, my son went into my office, found my calling card, and gleefully gave the scammer my calling card number, thinking he had saved the service in our house. And in fact, when I got home, he just greeted me gleefully about how he helped the telephone guy. Now, I kind of blew that off for a minute, and I was unaware that what had actually happened is that he had actually given the fraudster my calling card, until I received a message on my answering machine from the billing department of a telecom carrier advising me that my current long-distance bill was approaching $900. So unfortunately, I was forced to pay this gigantic phone bill, and I've had a chip on my shoulder ever since. I didn't hold it against my son. My goodness, he thought he was doing the right thing, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people. The scammer who defrauded me wasn't even located in the United States. And at my first CFCA conference, I learned about more sophisticated tactics that were being used to commit telecom fraud through other voicemail services.
You are a role model and key figure in CFCA's 40 years telecom fraud fighting activities. Why do you think everyone can recall your tenure on the board and your activities with CFCA?
That's a hard question to answer. I think it was due to the tumultuous period of time in the industry that I was president. This was a time of major mergers, acquisitions that reshaped the telecom industry. And there were massive layoffs within the industry. And many of us in the fraud and revenue assurance organizations were facing intense pressure to justify the significance of our job. Some companies cut budgets, laid off their entire fraud departments and revenue assurance organizations. Others outsourced their fraud prevention functions to vendors who specialized in revenue assurance. Now, as a former CFCA president and board member, I saw two significant issues that CFCA had to address for the survival of the association and the industry. First, what is the value of fraud prevention and revenue assurance to a telecom company? Up to this point, no one had any idea what the actual fraud losses were in the telecom industry. How do you measure the cost of fraud? That was a huge obstacle. And during my graduate studies at that time, I learned a quote from a gentleman, a knight, I guess we're called Lord Kelvin, that really impressed me. And he said the following: when you can measure what you're speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. When you cannot express in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. It may be the beginning of knowledge, but you have squarely in your thoughts advanced to the stage of science. Peter Drucker had a similar statement: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So measuring the industry telecom fraud loss became a top priority for me. Now, a former CFC board member named Kjell Fryerman Nielsen of Telecom Denmark had developed a method of measuring and reporting fraud loss in his company. And I consulted him about the topic, and he guided me through an initial approach to developing a crude but effective method for measuring industry fraud losses, which is now called the Fraud Loss Survey. The second item that we need to address is that CFCA had to include telecom vendors as members of the CFCA. Prior to that, vendors could attend, but they could not be members. Or then we were able to get vendors to join them as CFCA, but vendors could never be on the board of director or any type of officer. So all of those things had to change. We were all fighting the same enemy, and we needed the synergy that came about, that was involved with collaboration efforts of telecom carriers and telecom vendors, that led to the creation of effective fraud tools from a joint community of knowledge. And that was a forum that was unparalleled at the time of its creation.
You were inducted into the CFCA Hall of Fame. In 2023, what did this mean to you personally?
It was a joyful yet humbling experience to know that my contributions to the CFCA organization were esteemed by the current leadership of the organization, and I'm grateful to have received this recognition.
How did CFCA assist and support your fraud-fighting activities in your career?
Well, it's been said that knowledge is power, right? And I benefited from the unique insights that I gleaned from the CFCA Knowledge Network sessions. My AT&T colleague and friend, Adam Panagia, is an absolute genius with regards to understanding the tactics, behaviors of hackers and other sophisticated fraud schemes. And Adam expanded the scope of our understanding of our vulnerabilities, and that content carriers were just currently combating these schemes and losing. So Adam helped shape and give us a different perspective. He helped us to understand we need to see what the root causes were of our fraud exposures. And most of them existed within our own provisioning processes. And like I said, Adam was a genius. He was able to lay that out and show us how our own provisioning process had vulnerabilities that we never considered. So I, as well as other CFCA members, took notice and implemented the changes in our processes that improved our protections.
If I had to ask you for one great memory from your involvement in CFCA, what would it be?
After the horrific 9/11 attacks in the U.S. that took down the World Trade Center in New York City, the CFCA responded by adding U.S. Secret Service DSAC Robert Bob Weaver to the board of directors. Bob's his first board meeting, he impressed upon the CFCA directors the importance of expanding our membership network and influence beyond U.S.-based carriers. Now, his intellect and knowledge and leadership just transformed my thinking as well as others. During this experience, I felt like a high school football player receiving mentoring and coaching from an NFL football player who's in the Hall of Fame. His influence led to the expansion of CFCA's global footprint as an organization, and his insights were absolutely brilliant and genius. I think it has helped cause CFCA to be a significant industry association globally.
What did CFCA mean to you when you were heavily involved in CFCA activities? And what does it mean to you today?
Well, it was exciting to be a CFCA member in the good old days. I enjoyed building alliances with the industry community. We felt we had the power to make significant impacts that reduce fraud within our respective companies and communities. And it's a joy to see the vision of CFCA board members very impressed with the direction and the vision that the organization has and the implementation of that vision within the telecom community and other revenue assurance communities as well. It was a joy to hear that some of the financial organizations that are now members of CFCA, banking companies and other types of investment firms, it's great to see those types of companies and merchant companies joining CFCA. So a long answer, but it means a lot to me to see that CFCA is keeping pace and is keeping a pulse on what's happening in the industry.
What advice would you give to new CFCA members based on your own experiences with CFCA?
Well, I think we have to take in consideration the time and age that we live in now. Technology is expanding at an unprecedented rate. Now, when I retired from AT&T 10 years ago, the industry was experiencing an advancement in technology at a rate that was equivalent to all the technical knowledge accumulated in a century in just 10 years. So we have this 10-year century of knowledge growth within the industry. And I suspect that the deployment of AI will rapidly shorten the 10-year century that we've gone accustomed to reduce that to more of a accumulated amount of knowledge gained in a century in just 2.5 years. That's my estimate. This means that the value of being an active member of the CFCA is more important than ever before. Now, imagine how challenging social engineering will become when hackers start using AI to generate phishing scams or schemes or service order schemes that deceive carrier customer service personnel or provisioning centers. What will happen if crooks devise schemes to manipulate SS7 using AI to divert billing compensation for carriers to a fake carrier? One thing is certain, CFCA will adapt to the future technology threats against the industry, and I am confident that the CFCA will have a place of collaborative and collective resources within the association to combat advanced AI schemes.
Thank you, Clemmie Scott, for your insights, memories, experiences, and advice. You are an inspiration, and CFCA are proud of your contribution to the organization.